Most people think discipline fails because they're weak. They think they don't have enough willpower, enough motivation, enough inner strength. But the truth is far more interesting and far more liberating. Discipline doesn't fail because you're not strong enough. It fails because your system is wrong. Your internal architecture is working against you. And no matter how hard you try to force yourself into new habits, the foundation underneath you is cracking. Before we begin, I want to ask you something important. If the lessons you hear today shift even one part of your life, your discipline, your emotional strength, your sense of purpose, then please subscribe to the channel. Not because it helps me, but because it helps you stay connected to ideas that are designed to sharpen your mind, elevate your self-control, and realign you with the person you're meant to become. Now, let's talk about discipline in a way you've never experienced before. There's a method that fixes that foundation. A method that doesn't just tell you what to do, but reshapes who you are from the inside outward. The LOTUS Method is not a productivity hack, not a motivational trick, not a checklist. It's a philosophy, a psychological rewiring, a spiritual reconstruction. And like the lotus flower that rises from the mud, untouched and immaculate, it teaches you how to grow not despite your chaos, but because of it. But before you understand why the LOTUS Method works, you need to understand why everything you've tried before didn't. Everywhere you look online, you see perfect routines, 5 a.m. wake-ups, immaculate bullet journals, cold plunges at sunrise, ultra-disciplined diets, pristine workspaces. You see people who appear flawless, but you know this already. Most of these routines are performative. They're curated for the camera. They're not real life, and even when routines do help, they collapse the moment life becomes unpredictable. One bad week, one emotional setback, one wave of stress, and the entire system breaks. Why? Because all these methods focus on behavior, not identity. They try to change the branches of the tree without ever touching the roots. But the LOTUS Method begins underground, where few people have the courage to look. It begins with the mud, your distractions, your fears, your emotional clutter, your inconsistencies, your unresolved wounds, your hidden attachments. Not to shame them, but to transform them into the soil that gives birth to discipline. The LOTUS Method has 5 stages: cleaning, organizing, training, unity, and silence. But before we talk about them, you need to understand their purpose. The purpose of the LOTUS Method is not simply to make you disciplined. The purpose is to make discipline feel natural, effortless, aligned, an extension of your identity rather than a fight against your impulses. Imagine a person who wakes up every day at the same time, trains, studies, works, creates, not because they force themselves to, but because that is who they are. There is no internal war, no mental negotiation, no emotional friction. There is only movement, steady, peaceful, inevitable. Like a lotus pushing through the mud, blooming because it must. That is where the LOTUS Method takes you. But to reach that state, we begin with the first stage, cleaning. Not minimalism, not aesthetic organization. Real cleaning. The kind that requires emotional honesty and psychological courage. Cleaning is the destruction of everything that dilutes your focus. Not addition, but subtraction. Not doing more things, but removing the things that prevent you from doing what matters. People often ask, what should I add to my routine to be more disciplined? The real question is, what should you? Think of your life like a room. If the room is filled with clutter, it doesn't matter how much discipline you try to bring in. It has nowhere to fit. You can't install order in a place where chaos still occupies the space. And so the Lotus Method begins by removing the obstacles: digital noise, unhealthy habits, draining relationships, messy environments, inconsistent sleep, scattered thoughts. But here's the part that most people never hear. Cleaning doesn't require perfection. It requires truth. Truth about what is distracting you. Truth about who is draining you. Truth about what habits are quietly destroying your time. Truth about why your environment no longer reflects who you want to become. When you clean your environment, you're not just tidying a room. You're clearing a psychological landscape. You're removing signals that pull your attention apart. You're reducing cognitive noise. You're allowing your mind to breathe again. When you clean your social circle, you're not cutting people off. You're protecting your mental energy. You're reclaiming your emotional bandwidth. You're choosing to grow instead of shrink. When you clean your digital space, your phone, your feeds, your notifications, you're not unplugging from the world. You're unplugging from the addiction to stimulation. You're letting your mind remember what it feels like to be still. And when you clean your habits, you're not punishing yourself. You're preparing for who you're becoming. But cleaning alone is not enough. You could take a monk's vow of minimalism and still be lost if you don't know what direction you're moving toward. That is why the second stage of the Lotus Method is organization, not in the sense of hyper-productivity, but in the sense of clarity. Organization is choosing the architecture of your life. It is deciding what belongs and what doesn't. It is creating a rhythm that allows discipline to flow rather than be Most people fail because their lives are structured for impulsiveness, not intention. They rely on willpower in moments when they should rely on systems. They trust motivation when they should trust routine. They hope their future selves will be stronger, forgetting that the future is just the magnified reflection of the present. Organization in the Lotus Method is not about filling every hour of your day. It is about aligning your day with your identity. It is about becoming someone who knows what they need to do and when they need to do it, and who has created an environment where doing the right thing is easier than doing the wrong one. But here's the nuance. Organization must be compassionate, not rigid. Flexible, not obsessive. A guiding structure, not a prison. Because discipline thrives not under pressure, but under clarity. Clarity of purpose. Clarity of responsibility. Clarity of priorities. The Lotus Method works because it understands human nature. It knows that your brain doesn't want more decisions. It wants fewer. It wants a path that feels inevitable. It wants systems that carry you forward, even on your bad days. And when cleaning and organizing are combined, something extraordinary happens. Your mind begins to quiet. Your environment begins to support you. Your routines begin to take shape naturally. This is when the third stage appears: training. Training in the Lotus Method is not about punishing your weaknesses. It's about strengthening your identity. It's about letting repetition carve new pathways in your mind until discipline becomes instinct. Training is the furnace where the new self is forged, but it is not brutal. It is deliberate, controlled, purposeful. But before we continue into the deeper layers of training, unity, and silence, before we uncover the psychological mechanisms that turn discipline from a struggle into a default state, before we talk about how to build a mind that obeys your values instead of your impulses, if this message is resonating with you, if you feel even a small shift in your perspective, if part of you knows this is the system you've been missing, then subscribe to the channel. Not just for support, but so you don't lose the momentum you're building right now. When you reach the third stage of the Lotus Method, training, everything begins to change. And unlike traditional self-help cliches, this kind of training has nothing to do with punishing yourself or chasing productivity. Training in this system is the slow forging of identity through repetition, presence, and intentional discomfort. It is the deliberate shaping of your inner architecture, the strengthening of the part of you that chooses long-term clarity over short-term relief. Most people misunderstand discipline because they think it is a fight against their impulses. But training in the Lotus sense is not a fight. It is a dialogue, a conversation between who you are and who you want to become. When you train daily, even in small ways, you are telling your brain the same message again and again. I choose growth. And eventually, your brain believes you. It begins with a single action, waking up when you say you will. Not because you feel like it, not because you're motivated, but because doing so is the first proof that your word matters, not to the world, but to yourself. Training is building that proof day by day. The reason this works is scientific as much as it is philosophical. Neuroscientists have observed that the brain rewires itself based on consistency, not intensity. Tiny repetitions done every day override massive bursts of effort done occasionally. Small victories create psychological momentum. They teach your nervous system that you are capable of following through. But here's the most important part. In the Lotus Method, training is never done from a place of shame. You don't train because you failed before. You train because you are rising now. Each repetition is a step toward unity, the fourth stage, a stage most people never reach. Unity is what happens when your external behavior and your internal values finally align. When what you say, what you want, and what you do begin to match. This is where discipline becomes effortless, because you're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer wrestling with contradictions. You're no longer negotiating between your desires and your ideals. Unity is the quiet power of someone whose identity and actions form one continuous line. People who lack discipline are not weak. They are divided. Part of them wants growth. Another part clings to comfort. Part of them dreams of transformation. Another part fears losing what is familiar. Unity dissolves this inner war. It teaches you to live as one person, not a fragmented collection of impulses. But unity cannot exist without understanding your values, and values cannot be discovered in noise. Which is why the final stage of the Lotus Method, the stage that gives it its spiritual depth, is silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of awareness. In silence, the turbulence of your thoughts settles. The emotional fog lifts. The force you've been fighting against becomes the very air you breathe. Silence is where you meet yourself without distraction, where you hear the truths that routine drowns out, where you recognize the difference between what you want and what you've been taught to want. Every warrior tradition in history, from samurai to monks to stoics, understood silence not as a break from discipline, but as the source of discipline. Because clarity isn't born in noise. Strength isn't born in chaos. Identity isn't born in motion. Identity is born in stillness. In silence, something remarkable happens. You begin to notice the gap between your impulses and your decisions. And the moment you notice that gap, you gain power over it. You gain choice. You gain sovereignty. This is why the Lotus Method ends in silence. Because discipline is not merely the ability to act. It is the ability to choose your actions. And silence is where choice becomes visible. When all 5 stages of the Lotus Method, cleaning, organizing, training, unity, and silence interact. They create a cycle of self-renewal. You remove what weakens you. You structure what matters. You train what elevates you. You align what defines you. You reflect on what transforms you. This is why the lotus blooms. Not because it avoids the mud, but because it uses the mud as nourishment. Because what once threatened to bury it becomes the very material that allows it to rise. And that's the essence of this method. You don't need a perfect life to be disciplined. You don't need a spotless environment or flawless habits. You don't need to silence all imperfections. You need to use what you already have: the struggles, the setbacks, the emotional chaos, the confusion, and let them become your soil. The lotus does not bloom in spite of the mud. It blooms because of it, and so do you. If you've ever felt like your life was too messy to build discipline, remember the lotus. If you've ever believed your past mistakes disqualify you from becoming the version of yourself you admire, remember the lotus. If you've ever feared that you are too inconsistent, too distracted, too imperfect, remember the lotus. What matters is not where you started. What matters is what you're willing to grow toward. But here is the truth most people don't want to face. Discipline is not supposed to feel easy at the beginning. It is supposed to feel unfamiliar, because you are stepping into an identity you have not yet lived. But if you stay with it, if you walk through the mud instead of avoiding it, your habits stop being effort and turn into embodiment. And when that happens, discipline no longer requires motivation. It becomes a byproduct of who you are. Your life begins to change at a speed that even you can't fully explain. Opportunities arrive. People respect you differently. Your internal world stabilizes. Your priorities sharpen. Your mind becomes clear. Your actions become powerful. Because you are no longer a person trying to be disciplined. You are a disciplined person. And that distinction, simple as it may sound, is the difference between temporary improvement and permanent transformation. The Lotus Method is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. It is about becoming someone who blooms in the exact place life planted you. Imperfect, chaotic, unpredictable, human. And if you want this transformation, real transformation, the kind that changes your identity, not just your habits, then remember this final truth. The lotus rises only when it decides it is done sinking. If this message reached you today, if even one part of this method opened your eyes to the possibility of who you could become, then take a moment before you leave. Don't just move on to the next video. Don't let the momentum die here. Choose your next step consciously. And if you want more guidance, more tools, more stories, more systems designed to elevate your discipline, your mindset, and your inner strength, then subscribe to the channel. Join the journey. Stay connected. Don't let this be the moment you forget. Let it be the moment you begin. Your lotus is waiting. The only question left is, will you rise?